Hi everyone, this is Mehul Mehta and welcome back to my YouTube channel. For today's podcast, we have a very special guest, Dimitri Bianco. Dimitri is a very famous quant YouTuber here in United States, and he is in his YouTube channels. He talks a lot about quantitative finance and financial engineering. So first of all, I really want to welcome Dimitri and thank you for your valuable time.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Dimitri, if you can walk us through your background, like because you have been working in the quantitative finance space from a very long time, so if you can walk us through your background and like about your working experience in this field.
Yeah. So I've been, oh man, where to start at? I think probably go back. I worked in manufacturing and operations management, in corporate accounting and finance for 8 years during my undergrad. Got my undergrad, continued working in that until I'd finished my finance undergrad. And then in my master's in applied economics with specialization in financial engineering. And then I went on to work, I guess, I don't know, 8 years, 9 years now in quantitative finance and fintech. So one thing I think that sets me apart from most people is that I have done so model development, which is like quant research. I've done implementation, model validation, internal audit across almost all four spectrums of market risk, operational risk, credit risk, and I'm going to call it regulatory risk, which is like CCAR and PPNR and CECL and all that. And I've worked at the big banks like big, massive global banks, a short stint at a consulting firm. I've worked at regional banks, and now I'm working at a fintech firm doing very similar things to what a bank does, but more on like the techie side. And so I've kind of got that good grasp here across, I guess I'm going to say a solid 8, 9 years in quant finance, and then some corporate finance and accounting before that, which has really kind of helped lay the foundation from seeing things from a bigger picture.
Oh, that you have an amazing experience. So when I started my journey, I used to watch a lot of your videos, and that has really helped me in this field. So first of all, I really wanted to thank you for that. And I see like a lot of quant aspirants, they have like very common questions which I wanted to cover in this podcast with you. So I have a list of questions that I have prepared, and I'll ask you one like question step by step, and if you can answer those.
Awesome. That works.
Okay. So I mean, what like let's say what educational background or skills do you believe are essential for someone who's interested in the field of quantitative finance?
So I think before we start, let's dive into the different areas of quant finance because I think there's a lot of confusion about what is a quant. And this has changed, I think, significantly from like the 1980s when we started with like Fisher Black and Emmanuel Derman and all that. And then we've kind of progressed through this into today. There's really, I'm going to call them quants, like true, real quants. And these are going to be people that are building, statistical and mathematical models. The skill set for true quants would be the background in math and stats. And then I tell people, we're using programming as just like this, a crutch. Like it's just the way I express my ideas and explore my ideas. So quants are going to be extremely good at math and stats, but the programming side's not going to be their strongest suit. Then you have quant dev, which is probably the trendiest, coolest job to have on the markets right now. And so when you see everyone clout, like, touting out big salaries and all that, quant dev has been super, super competitive. Even some of the big name hedge funds have been recruiting from like Google and Amazon and Facebook, and everyone's really excited tech's laying off because now they're able to get top talent from quant devs. They're going to be development or they're going to be implementation though. They take models and they implement them. One thing I have noticed on the quant space, which differentiates quant devs from like DevOps in the tech space, is going to be they have to be able to optimize and make things faster with math. And so typically when you work at a big tech firm, right, you're like, how do I parallel compute? And how do I use a bigger server? And how do I get AWS involved? And, I don't know, why are we using C++? Why don't we use Python? And how do we optimize the two? And there's a lot of questions in the, I guess, computer software engineering, hardware engineering space on the quant dev piece. Again, you're going to need to know math and programming, but far less stats, far less actual modeling. And then you finally have, I'm going to call the business side of this, which doesn't sound very exciting, but this is the traders, right? The person that's using the model. So the quant builds the model, comes up with an idea, then quant dev puts it into some sort of easy to use tool that's optimized and fast and productive. And then finally, you're going to have the end user, which is going to be like the trader or the business person that's making loans or doing something else. And so I think when you look at the skills required to be a quant, you'll see we have almost no consistency in backgrounds.
Yeah.
So, what is your background's in engineering?
Yeah, so so I was an electronic engineer, which is like way different. It doesn't cover finance, but I did study few subjects of mathematics and programming. So from that way, I did understand, basic math and some advanced mathematical concepts.
Yeah. And so I think that's the thing when I start to look at a lot of quants, right? I think it's an important question to ask when you're saying, like, I want to be a quant is, do you want to go the quant research model development route, or do you want to go the implementation DevOps route or quant dev route? Because, right, a lot of students, I think, come from these unique backgrounds of like electrical engineering, or they come from computer science. And so you have kind of this background of undergrad foundations of math, stats, programming. Like, you have a little bit of everything. And so I think most of us end up confused because we start to see all these online forms, and a lot of the information's like the opposite. Like some are saying, only focus in C++ or C. And then other ones are saying only do Python, only do R. And then all of a sudden it's like, take all these math classes. And you're like, I can't take, 100 classes, and like, I
Right.
don't have the undergrad for it. But I think skill set wise, if you're coming from an undergrad, engineering is an amazing place to come from, just because you have, like you said, you have the math, you have some programming. Computer science backgrounds are good. Math backgrounds are really good, though you typically are missing, depending on how much programming you've done, some programming. And probably the worst background to come from is like the business finance side, like myself, because I mean, I think through like calculus 2 or something, maybe calc 3. I don't know. It's been so long, but you take that and it's like you take it the very first year, second year of your undergrad, and then you're just taking marketing and management and everything else. So I think the key skills to get is going to be math and stats for the quants, and then programming and math for quant devs. And then traders, it's all about thinking fast and going to a really big fancy name school.
Mhm.
Like if you can put, UPenn, Wharton, or you can put, Ross Business School or something on there, or Sloan, that is more of an advantage for you to be a trader than anything else, but not necessarily the most popular opinion.
No, and thank you for that. Because a lot of people they say that they come from a business finance background, same as yours, and they ask me this question, how tough is it to get into quant? And because if you read all the online forums, they say that you should have amazing knowledge of C++, advanced stochastic calculus knowledge, and I feel like no, I mean, of course, few roles needs that, but not every roles need that. So what do you think? Do you think like someone from a business finance background can transition into this role? Because a lot of people, at least I know from India, they really want to come from a finance background to a quant background. How challenging is it?
So it depends which route you go. I think it's very, very challenging. I think it's hard to conceptualize just because you're missing so many of the fundamental pieces. So for those that don't know my background, I started in Michigan's financial engineering masters, which no longer exists. There was a huge feud between the business school and the engineering school and the math department. It all blew up, and then they started a new one, which is a whole other story. But I did it for a semester, and I had kind of like what you're talking about. Like I took stochastic calculus my first semester, and I took oh man, I can't remember some other math classes, but it was like I'd seen some of this, but it'd been like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, so I hadn't seen it. Um, so going from a business background to a quant background, it's I think possible, but very, very challenging. And in my story, I did the first semester and then realized like I was missing too many pieces to finish it. Like I could have easily graduated, and I mean, to give you an example, I think Michigan's in our stochastic calculus class, the average exam score was a 32%. So essentially the
Oh,
whole class failed. There was one guy with
yeah.
100% who already had a master's from Europe. And so he had to redo it because his European degree wasn't worth anything in the US. But yeah, so the
Right.
average was 32. So like, I mean, I wasn't far off from all these other students here, but do you really understand it when you're only getting like a third of the questions right? So I think for a business student, it's very challenging. One route to do it is to try to find programs that are less mathematical. So kind of to your point too, right? Like I don't do financial engineering, like true financial engineering of derivative products. So I don't do stochastic calculus, and I'm not worried about the Greeks and sensitivity and all that. I build models for all kinds of things, but I don't work on the option pricing side of it. And I think too many programs these days have focused too much on that. You do need some advanced math. I think that's where the challenge is going to be for business students. The easiest path, though, is to find a business master's. So there are many quant finance masters that are in like a business school, and they're really excited for people that have like 2 years of work experience, or you've worked in a finance undergrad or an investing firm. And so if you're in India and you've graduated with like a commerce degree or something, and you've worked a couple years at a small financy firm, I think the best path is then to go into these business programs because they're not going to be as rigorous. So you're probably going to be missing a lot of the harder fundamental skills. Your job opportunities are going to be less, but it is a good opportunity to get your foot in the door and try to get those skills you need here. For me, though, I took off a full semester after my first semester in financial engineering and realized this is not for me. And I went and studied a whole semester of just doing math in the library at Michigan because my wife was still going to school there, so I couldn't leave. So I spent a whole semester just reading textbooks and studying all the material for my first semester and catching up. And then I went into an applied economics master's where I could still take financial engineering courses as my electives because I was technically a dual master student at that point. But trying to make that transition as a business student it's terrible. Like, I mean, you'll find people, I don't know about you, but I mean, like a lot of students that have like engineering or applied math backgrounds take stochastic calculus, and they're like, it was the worst class. It was miserable. And
No,
almost no one
it's
uses it.
definitely, yeah. I mean, you are right. If you're going for a derivative pricing role, it's where then most of the stochastic calculus is needed. But yeah, it's it's quite challenging. So coming to my next question, like because when let's say there are a lot of students who are going for the interviews. So like, what do you think are the most important subjects or let's say topics which basically a student should prepare? Because we do study a lot of different things in our masters, starting
Mhm.
from derivative pricing, risk management, stochastic calculus, Monte Carlo. So, actually people, students get confused what to study and how much to study. So, like, what do you think are the key subjects or the key topics which the student should know while going for an interview?
Okay, that's a really good question. So I think it depends where you apply. If you are running to do the buy side, so buy side's like the investing side, it's fun, it's exciting, and everyone wants to end up there. Um, the interview process, the skills I think are very different, not because the roles are more challenging. I think it's because it's perhaps not a as rigorous background as the sell side. So people are probably cringing when I say this, but um there's I don't know if you've seen the books. There's like the green book and the yellow book. They have like the lion on the front of the one. They're interview prep books. Those books are used predominantly by the buy side for the buy side. If you're wanting to into the buy side, I would just Google like Jane Street interview questions, and they're gonna ask you a ton of brain teasers, which drives me nuts. I don't know if you did any of the tests. I did like IQ
Mm.
tests to like
Yeah.
apply to a job, and it's like please take this IQ test to see if you're qualified or not to apply here. Um,
Mm.
the buy side is interesting. I think it's for those interviews. I think doing the repetitive, ridiculous questions, like I don't know, I don't even remember these questions, but those sort of questions are going to be challenging. But they're more or less just brain teasers. I would argue those are probably non-quant jobs in the sense that they are focusing on how fast can you think. And so in one of my videos, I discussed like quants are really slow thinkers. Like I get a problem and I'm working. I mean, I'm on a project now. I've been on for 18 months on one model. So 18 months on one model, it's like it's killing me. It's just driving me insane. But
Wow.
like traders think fast. So they have to make a decision like, instantly. They look at the models, they look at the output, they look at the market, they make a decision. And I think when you see these buy side interviews and what a lot of the students are going for is just memorize the IQ tests, memorize the interview prep, because that's all they're really going to be testing is, if, the stock price goes up or, duration goes down on this product, like what is going to happen to the delta of this option? And you just have to
Right.
know and memorize kind of the simple pieces of that.
Mhm.
I think when you go into more of the deeper side of the buy side, being like quantitative research that's actually in depth,
Mhm.
some good firms like DE Shaw, for example, that and also on the sell side when you're doing model development, like I really care that you understand statistical assumptions. And I interview, I think, different than most people, but I will make you build me a model like in an interview like this. Like there's no computer, there's no stats. The way to prep for this, I think, is to go through your courses and try to go through like your econometrics courses, your statistics courses. I'll give you a problem. And typically the way I do it is I look at your resume and I try to figure out like, okay, what classes did you take? If you didn't take time series, I'm not going to ask you like build me a time series model because I shouldn't expect you to know that because you didn't list it. So I might have you build me like a logistic regression or an OLS regression. And I'll say, okay, you have data. We're going to model today, I don't know, let's say loan value or like mortgage valuations of houses. And I'm going to
Right.
walk you through like this thing and ask, what type of model would you use? What type of variables would you use? And then I'll start getting into things like, what if your residuals are heteroscedastic? Like, what do you do?
Right.
How do you know that? And so I'm hoping they can, pull out like a test from memory from, the projects you've done. And
Right.
so what I'm really looking for on these is like, how do you think?
Mhm.
And I'm hoping we can get deeper into the weeds on it because typically we start off with a really high level view of building this model and doing some assumption testing. Um, then for the interview prep, I typically look at your projects or classes and I try to find a modeling project you've done and ask you the number one question everyone fails. I ask everyone is like, what part of like, where did you get stuck? Like, where did this project fail? Because every student, right,
Okay.
they assume like I had data. Like, I don't know. Did you do the weather prediction time series project that everyone does?
No, but I did build a bunch of models like value at risk model using like variance covariance, historical and Monte Carlo simulation. And then, because when I was presenting this in the class, the professor asked what are the limitations? And the limitations of the model, because at that time I didn't realize what are the limitations, and then I went back home and then I realized, every model has a limitation and
Mhm.
you cannot use the model in all the conditions, and that's where I was like I got to know like the kind of thinking that goes behind the model building, so yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I'm looking for. And oddly enough, it's very rare to find. So the fact that your professor asked you that is actually unique.
Right.
So one of the dumb projects most programs do is modeling like that the weather. So they give you weather data and then you build the time
Uh-huh.
series and predict it. And weather data is so noisy, it's hard to model. But
Right.
everybody like picks a model like on accuracy. They go, oh, this one is so accurate. It had like 99% accuracy and they pick it. And then like that's the end. Like there's no like I feel like the professors never asked us like, did you guys test stationarity on this? Or like, how do your residuals look? And what is the weakness of this model?
Right.
And that's where I think most people fail interviews because I'll ask those sorts of questions and they'll say, oh, my model was great and it fit and I got an A in the class. And I'm like, okay, so you don't really understand the model, right? Because as you're mentioning, right, you start going back and you're thinking about this like,
Right.
oh, this model was not very good. And
Right.
I did assume like, maybe it was normal. I assumed um like maybe the data is stationary. Maybe I didn't even test it, which most students don't test it. And so
Right.
when you add new data, the model blows up. And so for interviews, for me, I think the questions that I prepare for, I think you should study the most for model development would be like statistical tests. So what tests should you run?
Yeah.
And then also like what happens when they fail.
Okay, so
So
like what's the next step after they fail? Oh, okay.
yeah. Because for example, we'll go in time series. I love time series. And if you have time series on a resume, like I get really excited.
No, even I love time series. I did a coursework on time series, and I just love that project. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, for example, as an example question, I'll ask somebody like, what if did you test stationarity? And often they
Yeah.
say no. But then I'm like
Okay.
trying to say, so how did you know it was stable? But what I'm trying to get into with students in interviews is I don't want to see like, can you answer my 10 questions? My
Mhm.
best interviews are like, walk me through your resume. I'm just wanting to see like what classes you took. I expect you have zero experience just because I mean, most of us, come from a math, engineering, finance background from undergrad, and
Right.
then you went to a master's and then you finished. And so now you have like I had no internship, so I couldn't answer any of those questions. But what I'm really looking for is like, do you know your stuff and can you have an insightful conversation? And if you can talk about like a project you've done and the issues you're into, like even like finding data. I don't know if you've done personal projects in the past, but like finding actual data to build a project is like a huge issue.
Right, right. No, definitely that is true. Like because when I was building the time series model, I guess I used augmented equivalent test and the KPSS test to check
Mhm.
for stationary, and then I guess the test failed, and then I had to use the first order differencing to convert the data. So yeah,
Oh yeah.
I definitely. I mean, all those questions are really valuable to understand how the model actually works. So
Yeah. So for those types of like in-depth model development courses, study that. Study like the assumptions, study the tests. It seems dumb, but I mean, in industry, that's what we're doing. We're trying to see what tests we failed and what's going to work. For other ones like quant dev, a lot of it's going to be programming related. So I've been asked about like, have you used the Boost library in C++, and have you used like smart pointers, which more or less just clear memory for you. So it's like a pointer, and then they'll ask you to explain a pointer. They might ask you about a few algorithms or ways to optimize code. So definitely not my fun point of like exciting things. Um,
Right.
and then the other thing too is if anything on the buy side, they typically ask you like, can you give me a stock pitch? So we had a
Oh,
buddy of ours who went into the trading side over at UBS. I think it was at UBS at the time. And so me and my other American friend are like, do a stock pitch. And he's like, I don't like, what do you mean? Like, he's like a deer in the headlights. And so we gave him like, okay, here's just pick a company. So we picked a company. Then he read a few articles online. And then you just come up with so practice getting a stock. Like just get one. You don't need a bunch. Just pick your favorite company like Tesla or Exxon or I don't know, McDonald's or someone, Goldman Sachs. And then just have the pitch on like, oh, their earnings, they missed earnings last quarter. The fact that somebody knows this off the top of their head like blows my mind because I don't follow like, I don't know, specific companies. But for the buy side, they care about that. And so to prepare for the buy side, they're going to typically ask you some brain teasers, IQ, and then often like a stock pitch just because they want to see like, are you involved in the markets? And then also, how do you see the markets? Do you think it's a good buy or a bad buy? Um, I would try to come up with good reasonings on it, but I'm guessing they're probably going to just disagree with you to disagree often because they're trying to see if you can test the ideas here and kind of make an argument. So stock pitch and some of the technical questions and like those interview books are great for the buy side, especially on like market risk. From actual model development, focus on math and stats questions because I'm going to ask you more. So like, how do you actually build models and what are the assumptions behind those?
Thank you, Dimitri, because that makes sense. A lot of quant aspirants, they really want to understand how things work and like what kind of interview questions they can expect in the interview. So that was really insightful. Coming like I also have a few questions which I really wanted to ask. So a lot of students when they are in their master's degree, you know, they get confused like what kind of projects they should work on. Is it because a lot of students, what they do is they only focus on trading, or or few people only focuses on portfolio management. So like what is the optimal strategy like to follow? Because if someone is coming from a let's say to a master's program, so like what kind of projects do you think will help them to get a at least a interview, or I mean some guidance on that? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So first off, the biggest issues I've mentioned before is like, how do you get data to even do a project, which I think is the hardest piece. But to start, I would think in your mind, like, what do you really want to do for a job when you graduate? And don't pick a job title. It drives me nuts. And people are like, I want to be a quant dev or quant researcher. Like, stop and think about the skills that you want to do on a daily basis.
Right.
Because, like, when I started, I was like, I'm going to be a trader. Like, this is going to be exciting. And then I started really thinking about it. And I was like, you know what classes I enjoyed the most in my master's was taking stats. Like, no one else was saying that. Everyone's like, trading. And I'm like, but stats was more interesting. I think if you can think about the courses you want to do, it'll help you align your projects with what you want to do at the end of the day. And I think often students get swept up into this job pays more or this one's more exciting. But I think if you can find something that interests you the most, like programming or math or stats or whatever, and then starting to figure out like what projects really involve these sorts of skill sets, I think you'll inadvertently end up doing great projects that are relevant to what you want to do, and you'll get job offers from that. But even when you do things, for example, like say you are excited about portfolio management, all that, I think students often find the simplest projects that don't add a lot of value. And so they don't think about these things from a deeper perspective on it. So my advice for that is try to read, like go find an academic paper on it because you'll find out people do really weird things that you're like, I never thought about that. Like that makes sense. An example of this, for say you want to do like portfolio optimization or trading. One of these is like how big should you size a position? So let's say you find a stock or an asset of some sorts and it's mispriced. Like, and say you have I don't know, $1 million portfolio. You have, let's say you just start out with cash, you have $1 million. How much should you put in that position? Right. Because I mean, you can think about diversification, which is an interesting topic of how do you diversify that. You can think about like the depth of the position, which students never think about unless you talk to industry practitioners. But often, like, you have a mispricing, and if you put too much money into it, it'll actually drive the price to efficiency, and then it will disappear. Um, Other issues too is some of these assets might not exist. So let's say you find a mispriced mortgage portfolio for, I don't know, mortgages are huge, but you might have like a, I don't know, 300 million portfolio, right? But you can't do it in a position bigger than that. There's only one of these opportunities. But one of the books I think that was interesting was Marco Lopez de Prado's book on machine learning for finance. His book, I think, is a good read for a lot of students who want to go on the investing side, just because he starts to talk about some of these issues, and you can do a deeper, more meaningful project. I think these projects will give you more interviews because you can talk more deeply in the interview, which will get you probably a job offer or an internship because the project's interesting and unique. Also, it'll be very relevant to the industry, or it might even be something that they've never done. So if you find a paper on it and I found somebody challenging how PSI is calculated, and they had a whole other metric for doing this in math. And I'm looking at it like, we use PSI for everything. Why would I not use this? But if I had some like a paper and I built off that paper, trying to find like a unique topic to work on, I think is critical. Again, doing a paper or a textbook should spark ideas to give you something unique to do. If you're wanting to do anything market related, give a shout out to QuantNet, or shout out to what's it called now? Let me look it up real quick. I think it's Quant Connect. Yeah, Quant Connect. If you're looking for data, reach out to Quant Connect. So I know the CEO over there, he often gives out free data to students at universities just because he wants people to use the data and learn and be excited. It's very cheap too. So even if you're running a fund, I think like most of the products are like $10 or $15 a month, and you can pick
Wow.
specific products. So something that's cool too is like there's the Reddit, the Wall Street, Reddit forum that's pumped stocks up and down. They take that data, that text font, and they parse that into a data feed that you can use for modeling.
Oh, okay.
And they're going to give you
Wow.
more granular data than you can pull off of, like I was always on Yahoo Finance. I think that's where I pull like almost, everyone's on Yahoo Finance. I need to download stock prices. They're going to give you a lot better information, a lot more unique information, more real world examples here. I think that also makes the projects more interesting. And then you can put in your resume, did a project on like depth of trades using Quant Connect data on, and putting a bunch of details on that. I think it's the best way to do the projects. The other area too, I think, is that most students miss is that a lot of professionals in like the sell side, it's not popular anymore. So when I go to hire, most students are just chock full of derivative pricing, asset allocation, stocks, bonds. But if you do projects on the sell side, so for an example, this is like credit risk, figuring out how do you price out like auto loans, which is what I've been doing for like 6 years now. There's no like NC State's the only program that's teaching it. And so when I go to
Yes.
hire, it's like I look at NC State, but I also have all these other great candidates graduating from all these other programs. And so if you had a project on your resume on how to price auto loans, or like what they're called PD models, probability of default models,
Right.
I've seen like 2 students out of like thousands of resumes that have had a project on it. Just having a unique, simple project on using logistic regression or like a gradient boosting decision tree will give you a huge edge at all the banks because no one has a project on it. And just being able to talk about an interview as a fresh hire is going to give you a big leg up. So I guess my advice for this in general is look for projects, look for areas that are really cool, fun jobs, but try to find papers or industry practitioners and ask them like kind of what they're modeling. And that will give you an idea of like what we're doing in the real world. And then that will probably give you a better chance at an interview or a internship or whatnot.
Thank you. Thank you. Because I'm also a graduate of NC State back in 2022. So
I
and I
thought so,
and
but I
I
couldn't
really feel,
remember.
yeah, and I really feel that in every semester, like everyone has to build a credit risk model, be it PD, LGD, or EAD. And banks specifically, when I used to apply for banks, they used to get, oh wow, you have done this credit risk project I'm interested in, and I'm like, is this really important project? Because you see all your I mean the other batchmates in other universities, they are doing trading, and then I'm doing this basic credit risk project, and And then now I realize, why it's so important to have even a credit risk project in your resume. So
Oh yeah. Yeah,
definitely.
it is rare. It is very, very rare. And I think I did a video a ways back with Carnegie Mellon's data. I think it's like 60% or more of students that graduate go to the banks first. And most students don't realize that you're going to have to get a job at a bank to start your career, and then you can
Right.
transition. But you're right, having that experience will give you a foot in the door and get you a start, I think, in a career much easier than doing what everybody else is doing, which is, trading and those sorts of projects.
Right, right, right. Also, like, are there any particular programming languages that candidates should be familiar with? Because I'll just give you an example. Like when I came in, I was taught MATLAB, I was taught R, Python, not taught, basically few of the courses they were using, like Monte Carlo uses MATLAB. There was this other course which was using SAS. Then there was this risk management course using Python. Luckily, I did not took any trading course because I think I had to do, let's say, C++ or something. So like, so,
Yes.
like, what do you think? Like, if someone is coming in this field, what language should they learn? Like, any idea on that? Yeah.
Yeah. So that is extremely hard to answer. And like, I think to your point, the universities don't even know. So I remember the similar experience. I took like MATLAB, SPSS, Stata, C++, VBA, and I think R. Python wasn't a thing when I was around. Like it was like a new like the young kids were doing it. This wasn't something for professionals. But today I think the languages that are most predominant for banks, if you want to end up on the sell side, I think SAS is king. Any statistical modeling you do, SAS. Have you used SAS at work?
Yes, I no, so not at work, but back in my university, I was using SAS. But I know like a few companies like Truist, they have a very specific requirement that you should know SAS. So I know like banks which have like very specific programming preferred they should know SAS or they should know Python for that matter. Yeah.
Yeah. So almost every bank uses SAS. The exceptions to that would be Wells Fargo. So
Mhm.
Augusto Gianta, the head of their model risk management group, switched everybody from SAS to Python. So they're using Python.
Okay.
But like every other bank uses SAS, and the reason for it is that SAS is hands down the best statistical programming language. Like we looked at switching to MATLAB. Oddly enough, MATLAB is very popular in Europe, but it is not very popular in the US for some reason, at least not in the finance industry. So don't learn MATLAB. SAS is great at statistics, but it's pretty terrible at machine learning. So now we have this weird divide of you need to do statistics, so you have to use SAS at many of the banks. And now they're making everyone start to learn Python to replace the machine learning piece of this. So my advice to students, even though I do not like Python for a variety of reasons, is learn Python. It is probably the most common language. Like we use it in the fintech firm I'm at for everything.
Right.
So that's a whole struggle in itself. Um, in the banks, even if you use SAS or R, which are both amazing programs for statistics, and R is free. So a lot of the fintechs and other firms are going to use R if they're going to use stats. Um, you can use one of those, but just pick one language to get really good at it. And my advice would just be to use Python. It's going to be painful because I don't know if you've used Python for statistics. It's it's just not made for statistics. Like it's not made for model development. It's really made for like data engineering and like program development on like weird scales. But if you ever do pick a language, I would pick Python. It's probably the most just well balanced language. Um,
Right.
if you want to do actual statistics, so I would argue perhaps maybe learn a little bit of R. So most textbooks, I mean, I've even got like got a book next to me. I always have a book. It's an introduction to stochastic processes. And again, it's
R.
not related to finance. It's just a textbook on stochastic processes, and it's in R. And then I have a few other like time series books next to me, and they're all in R. So I think R is a
Okay.
great language for it. But for students, just pick one language and get really, really good at it. It's not too hard to switch later down the road. But especially if you're coming from like a business background or like a math background and you have not done a bunch of programming, like just get good at one language, and then later on you can worry about kind of expanding out.
Okay. No, definitely, because students like I do receive a lot of LinkedIn messages, which which programming language should we focus on? And I'm like, there is no one answer because
Yeah.
someone needs SAS, someone needs Python, and some like trading firms they need C++. But no, I guess to start with Python is really friendly. So. Also Dimitri, I wanted to understand. Let's say when you read a resume,
Yeah.
what do you look into it? Like, what is things that stands out for you? Let's say, I just want to, because because you are in the industry from a very long time,
Mhm.
and I feel like getting this insight from an industry person is like really valuable to the students. Like, what do you look in a resume?
Okay, so I'll actually just walk you through how I look at a resume because I have a process, and most of my colleagues look at it like this too. The first thing you're going to look at is where they're located.
Hmm.
So I want to know because I get tons of job applications from all around the world, and one thing I think which is frustrating for a lot of internationals is like we don't hire internationals.
Okay.
So I don't know if you've dealt
Right.
with that or not, but I get like someone from India, and it's like I went to like the best school in India. I have an engineering degree, I have a master's, all that stuff, and it's like that's awesome. But like there's a lot of
Right.
legal issues and paperwork, and it's hard to do international hires. And then there's
Mhm.
what most I don't think a lot of students realize either. The U.S. quant market is like all international. Like
Right.
I
Right.
don't know how what your program is
No.
like. But there was 2 Americans and 52 students in total. In
No.
China, I think was like 30. India was like 12 students. Like, and then there was like the other group. We'll put them like there was like 2 Americans, a guy from Greece, someone from like Croatia, like Brazil or something. Like it's always gonna be these outliers, but it's mainly India and China here. So for the hiring process, it's the first thing I look at is where are you from, because we need to hire someone that at least is physically located on U.S. soil.
Right. Okay.
Um, the second piece is going to be the degree, and I think what shocks most people is we look at this regardless if you are applying for an entry level quant position or you're applying for managing director, which is the highest role.
Mhm.
We were looking for someone who has I think like an associate director and a director title, which is like managing director is the highest, and then like director is second. We still look at the degree. Like I want to know what
Oh.
school you went to. My other colleague always would say like, what was your dissertation on? If you had a master's thesis or a PhD, you have to have your thesis. It's what journal were you published in? So
Okay.
yeah, we still look at that even in like senior positions. Um, the school branding helps give you at least a foundation of where you educationally started from. So, I mean, people say like, what if I can get work experience, but I have like an MBA? It's like, you're not going to work here. Like, you're only going to find one company that might hire you, and then everyone else is going to not do it. But yeah,
Right.
I do look at the programs. I do, being me personally, I know where I've hired from and have had past success. And even when
Mhm.
someone comes up from a new program, I'll like go into LinkedIn and look up the school. And if I can find someone I know that knows somebody from there, I'll call them and say, like, what do you think of this program? Do you think it's rigorous enough? Do you think the degree's there? That sort of information, just trying to get a baseline. Then after that, I look at the relevant topics and courses of the student. So I'm going to peruse the resume and try to figure out what topics have you covered, right? Because to your point, if you have derivatives, stock pricing, bonds, capital markets, like all these really fun buzzwordy things, like I'm not going to hire you because I work in fintech or I work on the sales. Like we don't do any of that, so it's not relevant. And unfortunately, I think most of the quant masters here in the US like recommend everybody put all that on there. And yeah,
Right.
stochastic calculus is kind of like the badge of honor of like you survived stochastic calculus. But most of you aren't going to be doing that. And so I
Yeah.
always look at the courses though, because I want to see like econometrics for the modeling I do, or a time series course, or statistical finance. Um, Especially things I know that are elective courses. Like, did you waste time doing cryptocurrency and I don't know, Web3 applications and blockchain? Because, right, like, do I do this for a living? Or you're applying to the wrong job. So that's what I'm trying to figure out is like, are your interests really in something else? Um, and as an example of this too, at a career fair, I went to a career fair. It was a master's and PhDs in statistics, machine learning, and quantitative finance for a university. And every single student came up to me and they told me how excited they were and how thrilling it was to do like natural language processing and image processing. And like,
I, yeah,
it's
I mean, to be honest, like yesterday itself, I had a session at Rutgers University. And I just said them, there was someone who asked, one of the students who asked me, I have done like lots of projects in natural language processing, and I asked him, let's say you open 10 job description, how many of them will ask you natural language processing? Or let's say how many ask you for neural networks, or let's say crypto. So,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah. And it like blew my mind because I was at a job fair, my company description's there. And like it tells you what I do. And
right.
I started asking the students, what are your degrees? And they were like, oh, I have a PhD in statistics. And I'm like scratching my head, like, no. I'm expecting, right, the PhD in like machine learning or data science. Like, that's what it should be. But oddly enough, it's so trendy that everybody puts it on their resume, not thinking, like, would I actually use this skill for the job? And there's
Right.
nothing wrong with taking it because you might have an interest in it. You take a class, but just don't list it on the resume. List the relevant topics. So, kind of a
Mm,
tip for those of you that are writing the resume is look at, like, to your point, right? Look at 10 job descriptions for that job, figure out what
mhm,
skills are on there that are common across all of them, and make sure those are on the resume. Because that's going to give you the interview. That's what I'm looking for is, do you have the time series? Do you have credit modeling experience? Um, yeah, what are your projects on? What are your interests? What are your hobbies? Like, I'm trying to make sure you're relevant to that. So that's the second piece, is looking at the degree title, then looking at the relevant topics. And then the last piece is just looking at the projects, because I have so many generic resumes that it's painful for me to interview people if there's not enough like good questions for me to ask. Like, if you have projects listed and there's details and information, then I start scratching my head thinking, like, oh, I wonder if they would be really good at this one project. Or like, you've done a credit project in university. I'm like, I'm really looking for someone to do PD models and LGD and EAD models from expected loss forecasting. Like, this person fits perfectly. And then that's what I'm looking for really on the resume, is trying to make sure those skills kind of match up to the job hiring process, not
mhm,
necessarily the trendy things. And even like an NLP, like the fintech firm I'm at, we've played with the idea of doing some NLP,
okay.
but it would be like one project. So like, I can't hire you
Oh,
for one project and then, you're
right.
unemployed, or like you're just not working for 9 months out of the year.
No, definitely. No, that's a really cool insight for resumes. Also, like I see like bunch of, so when I first came to US for my masters, all my batchmates they were targeting quant trader. They were just applying to trader jobs left, right, center, and I was and they were interviewing, but they were not able to convert the offers. Most of them, I guess, most of them, they when they came to US, everyone was targeting for trading roles, and I'm more like, let me target quant analyst role because this is something that no one is targeting. So, but what I see is most of the students when they come to US, because traders have, high paying salary, so they say let's, most of them apply for trader roles and get rejected. So, like, what are any suggestions for them? Like anything you want to guide or anything you want to suggest?
If you actually want to do the trading route, I would spend most of your time um, focus on networking. So it sounds bad, but as I mentioned at the beginning of the interview and podcast here, was that if you want to be a trader, go to a really big name school, because having Harvard, Princeton, Yale, MIT on the resume means something. And people that are going to be working in trading firms are like, most of them have the bro culture, and they're going to want to hire people from those programs. And I understand it. I mean, even myself, when I see someone from University of Michigan, I get excited, like, oh, they went to Michigan.
Yeah.
Like, my program doesn't even like, I guess my econ masters does exist, but the
Yeah.
quant one I went to didn't even exist. And even when it's the new quant one, I get excited.
Mm,
But for how to break into that is going to networking events. Trying to find them is challenging. One secret to doing this is, if you have a program like a quant finance club on campus, is
uh,
go and invite a bunch of people from the industry in trading to come speak, and be on the group, like run the group, be like the president, the treasurer, whatever, be part of the group, and then contact these people and ask them to come, and you'll slowly build relationships with them to figure out what they do and don't want.
mhm,
I mean, as an example, this I was at the Princeton trading conference, and it's like Quant Finance and Trading conference here this last spring. And afterwards, the students that set that thing up, they all do it for free. They come from, Rutgers, and I think in Carnegie Mellon, NYU, like a bunch of students just volunteer to run it. They went to dinner with us and the industry practitioners afterwards. And this girl had dinner with one of a fairly famous quant. And she's just chatting away with him. And at the end, he goes, "Hey, like, you're looking for an internship?" And she's like, "Yeah, I haven't found one." And, whatever. He goes, "Okay, why don't you just come work for me for the summer?" And so
Wow.
I was like surprised, really? But yeah, it works. The networking piece is important. Again, for the trading, practice the IQ tests in those interview books, because the students that get the jobs in trading are not the ones that are the world's best, most intellectual mathematicians and statisticians. They're going to be people that think really fast. So networking, being a part of groups like Quafa New is a group in New York City, if you're anywhere around there. And you can meet people like Nisam Talab, Emmanuel Derman comes sometimes. Anyways, there are a bunch of famous people that are just quants and nerds. Getting into those atmospheres will actually just get you an opportunity. And I think far too often for the trading side, people don't realize there's thousands and thousands of applications, right? Everyone in your program, everyone in my program, everyone in every program in the US is applying for these. And the best way to do it is to network and then practice the IQ test, because that IQ test is what filters everybody out. And then even when you do the interviews, I think often students are missing what they're looking for, which again, they're looking for depth. Like, how do you know a stock is good? Or how do you know a model is good? Or how do you know, even for quant dev, right? I was asked a bunch of C++ questions. So if you're in quant dev, learn C++. That's probably the best language for that. Back to our other question. But knowing these weird in-depth things and doing a project where you get into the weeds with this, I think is important. Also practicing your interviewing skills. So find someone. So I am American. English is my first language and everything, but I was too embarrassed as an American to go to like the university or the program and do mock interviews, right? Because I'd look stupid. Like, who wants to do this? But I failed like 100 interviews. I think 90 to 100 interviews, because right, I didn't practice, but I'd failed so many, I just didn't care anymore. So like when I had the interviews, I had like the phone or the Zoom call. I was like, yeah, like, but I already knew all the answers. Save yourself a bunch of time and just find some friends in like your program and practice the interviewing and talk about your project, because the more you talk about your project, the faster the ideas come to you and you can go in better depth. Even if you took like you built a project 6 months ago and you've had all this schooling, like, you're going to forget. Like, you're not going to remember what tests you ran because it's been 6 months. So practice the interviewing piece as well. I think that's how you kind of break into the quant roles or the trading roles specifically.
Okay. Sure. That was really insightful. Also, like one of the questions most of my junior ask me is, like they want to pursue a certification, and I saw your video the other day, and that makes sense. But I still want to cover this in this podcast. Like a lot of students, they think like, which is closest to quant, like is CFA closest, FRM or CQF? Because I see a lot of students pursuing CQF, but then we have like I have seen like students pursuing CFA level 1, level 2, level 3, and they said, I want to become a quant and stuff like that. So, like, what are your suggestions? Like, what do you think is relatable, and what should, let's say, if someone wants to enter into quantitative finance, which is like more relatable?
Okay. So first off, if you're a student, just focus on school. Don't get a designation. So that's just my first piece. Just because, as we'll see here in a second when I talk a little bit about them, they don't add a lot of quant value, but there are areas where they could be beneficial in. But often, like right in the interview and the resume, I'm looking for those really good courses. I'm not going to get all jazzed up and excited to see like an FRM or a CFA. The CQF specifically, I think, is way, way overpriced. So I don't know what it is now, but it was like $20,000 to do it. It's so historically the CQF was designed to take people from like the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, the old Wall Street veterans who knew how to do a lot of stuff, but didn't really have enough math to get by in the new era. So the CQF was set up to take industry practitioners and then give them some mathematical rigor. For students and everyone else, I don't think it's the best value. I think it's very expensive. And in the US too, there's kind of an axe to grind between the US and Europe, meaning like the US does not like Europe and Europe doesn't like the US. I mean, if you Google Paul Wilmot, famous quant, whatever, in Europe, and he's always talking trash about Americans and quants in here and everything. But we don't get along. So when you get a CQF in the US, I feel like most of us are already getting that like negative kind of feeling from Europe. We're like, CQF sucks. Like, we're not going to consider it. And it's not a real degree. I mean, it's a certificate. But if you're already getting a really good master's, I don't think there's a need to add that. Then the CFA and the FRM. I think if you are going to go on the buy side, get the CFA. if you're going to do a designation. The reason being is the buy side is all about finance, 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 and you're going to be covered by tons of financial professionals. And so someone that has an MBA is going to get really excited and jazzed up that you have a CFA. Somebody commented to my FRM video, which I'll make a note, they mentioned that the reason you get a designation is to really weed out and show that you're serious about a topic here. If you're going to graduate from a good quant finance master's program, which is, I don't know, a million times harder than a MBA where you just show up and you're friends with people and do a few, group projects. With that being said, like I've already weeded you out, like, right? I mean, how many Indians and Chinese have applied for this master's position? And only a few of you got it. And then you have to go through the really rigorous classes and take the exams. Like, if you've got to that point, I don't think there's much value added. The finance community thinks, though, it adds a piece of like, oh, you're really invested in this because somehow you got an extra designation. I think it's also good to understand financial products. So they assume that since you have a quant finance background, you obviously have taken no finance. You know nothing about finance, which I don't know. They must not have been to these quant finance masters because, you probably take like capital markets and, fixed income and all that. So the CFA, I think, is good for the buy side because the people that will be doing the hiring will value the CFA. It'll add a little bit to your background, but I mean, understanding accounting is not going to be a big lift, and that's mainly the CFA 2 exam. So that's that. If you're going to go for the sell side, so banking, and you want to do a designation, I think the FRM is the closest. So as you probably know, right, on the sell side, we call it risk management, but it's really quantitative finance. And the FRM, I think, was helpful in a managerial position. So as I've climbed the ranks, it's become more useful just because most people aren't going to have my background where you've worked in operational risk and you've worked in credit risk, you worked in market risk and regulatory risk. And so most people don't know that you're only building one set of models. And so the FRM gives you that big picture to see everything. But again, from a quant perspective, right, doesn't teach you what a model is. Like, you learn like what GARCH is and how you model volatility with it. And then that's it. There's no like understanding of like assumptions testing or data issues or, GARCH can be used for any time series model that has heteroscedasticity. Like, they just say it's used for volatility. So that's kind of the three. I mean, CFA I'd do for buy side if you have time. FRM would be the sell side. CQF is nice, but very, very expensive and not very valued, I think, in the US where most of the quant jobs are. But in general, like, if you just focus on your schooling first and then worry about getting those sorts of designations later, I think that's beneficial. I actually don't consider any of them for hiring. So as I mentioned in the other video, like, I've only had one requirement in a job post to have the FRM. Other than that, even like people I run into like at the banks, I'm like, no one has enough. I'll say like, oh, I have the FRM, and people are like, what is that? Like, what designation is that? Like we're at a bank, like, you should know this. We work in risk management. And nobody knows. Like, it's just not very popular, I think, as a designation.
Okay. Thank you for that, because when I was also coming to US, I had this doubt of pursuing FRM, and then my program director said that our course is a lot inclined towards risk management. Then how will that add a value to your profile? And I said, I don't know. It's just, people, students, or let's say people, different individuals pursue FCFA and FRM, and I thought like that will add up to my resume. But yeah, I guess
I think
my that
part of
yeah.
it too is, I think, like, right, you would assume that adding something extra will make you more competitive. But as you know, like, doing a master's is a huge time commitment. Like, the classes, the homework, the projects, like, just the master's itself. And then I see students that spent so much time doing those designations and it never really gave them like sort of an edge.
Right.
And so I think it's hard to balance all the time commitments. And I think most programs, at least the smarter programs, have started advising students, ones I've been talking to, like, why don't you wait until you're in your career like a year or two and then start working on it? And I did my FRM my first year, and it wouldn't have added any value before then, because like, as a student, right, I'm just looking for a job. And when I started it, no one even knew what the FRM was. I had to like explain it to my boss, and I went and purchased all the books and brought all the books and explained it to her. And she's like, yeah, you can use your free time for this. But yeah, it wasn't like a big ad. But I do feel bad for students, because then you are adding that much more stress on yourself trying to get some sort of edge, especially if you're international, so you can stay here. Because I mean, your time is limited, so you have to do something. But I would argue just focus on your masters and don't waste too much time on the designations.
Okay, thank you for letting me know and a lot of other students know about this. One last question I have about this podcast is like any suggestions you have for quant aspirants or like any myths you want to any misconceptions that you want to clear about quant finance, like anything from your side.
Oh man, those are hard questions. I think the biggest piece of advice I can give students everywhere, whether, I mean, I am shocked. I have people in high school watching me because I had no idea what I wanted to do in high school. But you have high school, undergrad, grad school, even like professionals who are looking to move into quant finance, is figure out what you actually like to do on a daily basis. I know in my mind, like I remember graduating with a finance undergrad, and I took one class on financial engineering and was like convinced I wanted to do it. And I never really understood why I wanted to do it. And it wasn't until grad school that I realized I love statistics. And I even took statistics in my undergrad and I hated it. Like I was like, this is stupid. Who's doing this in the industry? Um, but I think a lot of times students get focused too much on the money piece and too much on the title. So that's another piece that I always worried about. Like even in a career, so an industry practitioner, right? You're like, if I could just get one more promotion, I'll be like a vice president finally, and then I'll be on a director and a managing director. But I think the best advice for those looking to get into the quant side is like really read the material, talk to industry practitioners, really try to figure out if you enjoy it, because you're going to be competing with people like me who, I mean, I've got textbook after textbook. Just I have all these textbooks sitting on my desk. I'm actually using these for a project now. I have like a Fisher Black book. I have one on how to write a better thesis. But the advice is just find something you really enjoy doing. If you don't enjoy doing it, you're not going to last in the long run. And I see a lot of students that get the master's, which is, as you know, a big time commitment, a lot of money. And then they get into the job and they realize it's not as sexy and cool as like all these movies, like The Big Short, and everyone thinks like people are running around like crazy, like, I don't know. I've only seen clips of these. I've never seen the full movies, but everyone gets really excited about it. And they was like, they're doing math and stuff. And it's like, it's not really that exciting, but if you like math and stats and you're really passionate about it, it's really exciting because you get to do something you love for a living. I think the same for quant dev. Like it doesn't excite me. I mean, I'm doing part of it now, my job, and I hate it. But there are people that get up and are really excited to program in C++ and to optimize and do parallel computing. And I think my biggest advice if you're wanting to do quant finance is don't think about the money, because that's money will come with success no matter what you do. I mean, you could be the world's best graphic designer at Google and make, six figures, or you could be a quant working at a bank doing statistics, which is like two very, very different worlds here. So try to find things that you absolutely love to do. The other myth, I think, is don't fall into the trap of what is a true quant or a real quant. Because I hear this so much. Even when I started my videos, right? I have a video like, why you're not a quant. I think too many people focus on like they have to end up on the buy side. They have to end up trading and they do not deviate. I think one of the biggest myths we see is that real quants are on the buy side. I mean, if you look historically, financial engineers are sell side and they're real quants and they do math and stats. I think often the big myth is that there's so much money and so much excitement on the buy side, but everyone's missing out, I think, on the sell side. And so a lot of the myths of like you're going to make seven figures and only real quants make millions of dollars is like the world's biggest lie. Because anyone you reach out to on LinkedIn, if you actually ask them, like, don't tell me your actual salary, but like, can you give me a ballpark? Most of us are in like a few 100,000. I mean, starting is like 80, 90, 100, which I mean, it baffles my mind that people think like, oh, that's terrible money. I'm like, 70,000, 80,000, like, that's great money you could live off of. And then you realize like career wise, right? If you stick this out and you enjoy it and you end up in your 30s and 40s and 50s, you're going to be making at least, 3, 4, 500,000, but it takes time and effort. It's this long marathon here. So I think the myths to be aware of is like, you're not going to make seven figures at the beginning. There's always an outlier. Also be very leery on the rankings of quant programs. So not many people talk about this, but I'll throw a little pitch in here. How you calculate an average, you would assume that quants would get real excited about it, but they oddly do not. And a lot of programs exclude the bottom parts, or they have a lot of programs will focus on industry practitioners. So you've been working in the industry for 10 years, you go back and get a master's, and then you come back and you get a master's degree and you come out making $300,000, right? It must be a really good program. But it's not, right? You have 10 years of experience. You're already starting that. So my big myth to bust is like, don't focus on the money. And then also with the aspiring quants is like look for things that you really enjoy doing and follow that. And if you end up in quant dev, or traditional finance or marketing or something else, like do what you really love, because it is a long career no matter where you end up.
No, thank you, Dimitri, for that. And this was a very, I mean, at least for me, it was really insightful. Got a lot of different opinion, like understanding and opinions upon different topics. So I really want to thank you for taking your time out and having this podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's great to have another Quant Finance YouTube channel on here, because there are really not there are not many of us, as I mentioned to you at the beginning before we recorded. I think I've
Right,
been doing this for like 8 years now, and I keep thinking
right,
someone's gonna pop up. Someone's gonna pop up. And there's been a few like technical channels or quant dev channels, but no one who's like just providing like actual quant finance advice. So thanks for having me, and I
right.
appreciate you for creating your own channel as well.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.